Everyone is familiar with the way we categorize the commandments in the Torah. We divide the commandments into three categories. One is mishpatim, judgments. These refer to the rational laws, the laws that govern civil society, laws that make a lot of sense. If the Torah had not been given, we probably would have come up with many of these laws on our own. You look at other nations that are civilized, they have similar laws, and they're basically laws that are rational. We would have anticipated them. Sometimes we may have thought otherwise about a given law, but in general, these are laws that appeal to the mind, that resonate with us intellectually and rationally. Then we have a second category called edo, testimonials. These are commandments that we probably wouldn't have thought of ourselves. It probably wouldn't have occurred to us that once a year we should eat unleavened bread because the Jews coming out of Egypt 3,300 years ago ate matzah. But once these laws were given to us, they make a lot of sense because it's important for people to remember historical events and to incorporate the lessons of those events into our lives. And these laws also resonate with us, not quite the same way as the mishpatim, but nevertheless, they make a lot of sense. And we're supposed to look at these laws as testimonials to try to incorporate the lessons of the past into the present so that we mold the future in a way that makes the future a lot brighter. And then we have the third category called chukim, or the singular would be a chok. These are commandments that are not rational. Sometimes they are referred to in English as trans-rational, super-rational. These are commandments that not only had we not heard them from God, had they not been mentioned in the Torah, we wouldn't have anticipated them. But even after we hear them, they make no sense to us. They're an enigma. And by design, they are not meant for us to be understood, for them to be understood by us. Why? Because God has certain commandments that he wants us to just accept because he is the one who created us and he commanded us to keep these laws. Now, there are many chukim in the Torah. Many people consider the laws of kashrut to be a chok. Some disagree. The laws of not wearing a mixture of wool and linen, Rashi says, is a chok. It doesn't have any rational basis that we can understand. But of all the chukim, of all these enigmatic, unrational, irrational, or super-irrational commandments, the one that stands out is the one that we read about in this Torah portion of Chukas, which refers to the para aduma, the red heifer, the red cow. The red cow is a cow that is red, obviously, that was used in the purification rite of someone who had come in contact with the dead, and when that person becomes ritually impure, which means that that person has to pause from their involvement with things that are holy and spiritual. They cannot enter into the temple. They cannot partake of sacrifices until they go through this purification where they took a red cow and they slaughtered it outside of the temple precincts, unlike any other offering that was brought in the temple. And that's one of the enigmas, why that was so different from any other offering. Then they would burn the meat of the animal after slaughtering it. They would dilute it with spring water and sprinkle it on the person who had come in contact with the dead on the third day and on the seventh day, and then they are considered purified, and they could enter into the temple and partake of sacrifices. That's the ritual of the Para Aduma, and Rashi says this is a commandment that doesn't have any intelligible explanation. King Solomon, in fact, said, I tried to fathom it, but it was too distant for me. Only Moses, the Midrash says, was able to appreciate the reason for this commandment, but it's elusive. Nobody else in the world in all of history ever understood the commandment, could not find any meaning to it. That is, until you read a subsequent portion of Rashi. After Rashi got finished saying that we can't understand it and we're taunted for doing things that make no sense, but we do it because God said so, and that's it, and that's final. A few verses later, Rashi quotes the words of Rabbi Moshe Hadarshan, a rabbi from Provence, who collected many midrashic material on the Torah, and he gives us a very beautiful parable, and he says it's like a mother whose child soiled the palace, and the people in charge of the palace said, let the mother whose child soiled the palace come and clean up her mess. Similarly, the mother is the red cow, the child is the golden calf that the Jews erected in the desert and worshipped one of the worst possible sins, if not the worst possible sin ever committed by a nation, created this huge mess. Let the mother, the red cow, come and atone for the mess of the child, of the golden calf. Sounds like a very beautiful parable, and it makes a lot of sense. True, we would not have anticipated this on our own, but once we know it, it's like any other of the testimonials. Once we know those commandments, they make a lot of sense to us. So here also, this makes a lot of sense. Why is it then called a chok after Rashi gives the reason? Had Rashi not given us the reason, you could argue that Rashi didn't accept the reason. He didn't like it. He didn't embrace it. It didn't resonate with him. But Rashi does accept it, and it does resonate with most people who read this. And yet Rashi insists that this is something that is beyond reason. One answer to this question was given by Rabbi Dov Ber of Mizrich. He was the successor to the Baal Shem Tov, the second leader of the entire Hasidic community, and the teacher, the master of Rabbi Shneir Zalman of Liadi, the founder of the Chabad Hasidic movement. And he says, we're looking in the wrong direction. The enigma is not the red cow. The enigma is the power of Teshuva. The red cow is a ritual that involved us changing ourselves, purifying ourselves. And with that, we're able to expunge from our record this terrible sin of the golden calf. And that's the model for the power of Teshuva for us and for all of humanity from the beginning of time until the present. That when a person does something wrong, sins egregiously, nothing can come close to the golden calf. But even so, the power of Teshuva could erase that past. That's the enigma. How could it be possible for Teshuva to come and eliminate something that is a fait accompli? It's like someone kills someone, God forbid, and he regrets it. Does that bring the person back to life? It's spilled milk. It's too late. The damage was already done. Every time we do a sin, we sever our ties with the source of life. We sever our ties with God, who's the very source of our lives. So how is it possible to erase all of that? So Teshuva is the ultimate enigma. It's the mother of enigmas, because it's the only example that we have in existence where we could change the past, where we have control over the past. We can undo irreparable and irrevocable damage, it seems. That's the power of Teshuva. Where does it come from? Our sages tell us that Teshuva is one of those things that preceded creation. What does that mean, that it preceded creation? Creation includes also time. So before God created time, there's no before. It means it transcends creation. That whatever is normal in a natural world, which is the world that we inhabit, and by design, that's the world that God wanted to be natural, God also enabled us to reach higher than the natural order of the world to clean up the mess, the things that we break, the things that nature says cannot be repaired. It's finished. It's out of existence. We have the power to change that. That's the ultimate enigma. That's the mother of enigmas, because it enables us to transform that which we thought was beyond repair. But why is this lesson taught specifically with regard to the red cow and the golden calf, and not in any other context? The idea of Teshuva is not isolated to this one commandment. We find it in many places, because arguably this is a case where you would think Teshuva would not be able to help more than in any other place, because this transgression was the ultimate reversal of what happened at Mount Sinai. In an earlier class, I mentioned the fact that when God created Adam and Eve, they were intended to live forever. But when they ate of the forbidden fruit, that brought death to the world. When the Torah was given at Mount Sinai, that reversed their reversal. They reversed immortality into mortality. Sinai reversed mortality into immortality. Through the golden calf debacle, they reversed the reversal of Sinai, which is a reversal of what happened at the sin of the tree of knowledge, which is a reversal of the original plan, as it were, that the world would exist and people would live forever. So this brought death to the world. This reversed the greatness, the power of Mount Sinai, the ultimate experience, more important than any other historical event, because that set the tone for God's relationship with the world and with us in particular. And even such a reversal, even such a heinous and egregious reversal, God says you could wipe that away. The Talmud, the Jerusalem Talmud, discusses the different things that deal with sin. And the Talmud, I'm going to read some of the passage of the Talmud. There are 4 responses to sin. Wisdom says, when a person sins, what is the response of wisdom? Let the person who sinned be pursued by his own sin. In other words, wisdom and logic dictate that negative behavior begets negative results. A little child, you tell the child not to play with a knife, and the child plays with it and cuts his finger. You're not going to say the child was punished for using the knife. The child suffered the consequences of playing with a knife. When we sin, there are natural consequences, and wisdom has no way of repairing it or eliminating it. Prophecy says, let the sinner die. Why? Because the Rabbi explains, prophecy is the ultimate manifestation of one's spirituality. The laws of spirituality dictate that if you fight against your spirituality, you're fighting against the very life source of your existence. You're fighting against God, who is the source of your soul's existence. So you're cutting and severing your ties with your source of life. So prophecy says, you sinned, you die. Torah says, let the sinner bring a sacrifice and he will be atoned for. Torah transcends the world, not quite as Teshuva, but Torah also transcends the world, which means Torah could find mitigating circumstances and find ways of getting you out of your trap that was caused by the sin. It's like a good lawyer could find a way to exonerate you. What does Torah do? Torah says bring a sacrifice. Why? What is Torah doing by telling you to bring a sacrifice? A sacrifice involved an animal. You didn't sin. It's the animal in you that sinned. What can we do when we have an animal soul that has tremendous amount of energy and passion, and it caused us to stumble? So when you bring that offering of the animal, it's a way of highlighting the fact that we have a built-in weakness, an animalistic tendency, and therefore we shouldn't be held accountable to the same extent that if we would be totally guilty on our own. But then the Holy One, blessed is He, God Himself says, let him do Teshuva, and he will be atoned for. And the Rebbe explains that Teshuva not only transcends the world, it transcends our connection to God through Torah. So even if we messed up in terms of our relationship with God through Torah, God Himself says, I will give you the power to do Teshuva, to alter everything and bring about complete atonement. That's the enigma of the Parah Aduma, that the mother can come. Teshuva is compared to the mother. And in Kabbalistic terminology, we know there are 10 divine attributes. Of these 10, 3 are intellectual, 7 are emotional. The 7 emotional traits, kindness, judgment, are the instruments through which God creates the world. They're involved and inherent within nature. But then there is the transcendent aspect of God, which is the intellectual attributes of God. One of them is called Bina. Bina is the primary intellectual power through which you create the emotional powers. Bina transcends the emotional powers, and Teshuva is associated with the attribute of Bina. And when you reach that attribute, the mother can give birth to new offspring, healthy offspring that are cleansed from any stain of Teshuva. And this is what our sages mean when they tell us that even the tzaddikim, even the most righteous people, will do tshuva when Mashiach comes, which means that the righteous person follows Torah, has a perfect relationship with God through Torah, doesn't have the opportunity to enjoy that higher relationship through tshuva, doesn't get to meet its mother, so to speak, because there's no need for tshuva, you would think, if you're doing everything right. But when Mashiach comes, even the tzaddik will be granted the ability to fathom that enigma of tshuva that only the sinner, the actual sinner, has experienced. But in the days of Mashiach, everyone will be able to experience that power of tshuva because it's the utterly transcendent relationship that we have with God.